Welcome back to the Thrill of Driving podcast, or I should call it the Thrill of Riding
Riding,
podcast,
yeah.
because this episode we are talking about Royal Enfield and specifically about the Royal Enfield Super Meteor 650. I just went to Jaisalmer to ride the motorcycle. We had the first rides. My review of the Super Meteor 650 is already up on Evo India on the website, on the YouTube channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see a link on your screen right now. If you're on any of our podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, Google Podcasts, just head over to YouTube, type in Super Meteor Evo India. You should see it up on your screen. I'm Aatish Mishra. Welcome to the podcast. And today in the studio with me, I've got Karan
Hello.
Ramgopal. Karan, what do you think of Royal Enfield? Over the last few years, they've really changed things up, no?
They've really changed things up. Say 7 years back, the bikes were a completely different story. I myself was not a fan of Royal Enfield at all to begin with. I felt they were really unrefined machines. The build quality was really not up to the mark. But over the last 5-6 years, they've really changed the direction of their company, and that shows in their products. Like the Interceptor, and I think after that, I feel especially after the UK facility, it really shows they're a different company altogether, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And over the last few years, they've proved themselves over and over again. They've really performed well in our road tests, in our comparison tests. And recently, we had the iMoti Awards, and Royal Enfield just bagged it again with the Hunter 350. You think about it, in the last 5 years, they got
The third win, right?
third win. Yeah. So they had the Interceptor 650. Long ago, they had the Continental GT as well, the 535.
Correct.
But recently, it was the Interceptor 650, then followed by the Meteor 350, and now the Hunter 350. And really, it shows. I mean, their products have really stepped it up.
Come a long, long way.
Now, the Super Meteor 350, 650, oh my God, it's so confusing, all of these names. Super Meteor 650, that is what we're talking about today. You were going to go ride it. What happened?
I went to Dakar, and I'm really happy about that. I was a little bummed about missing the ride, but all in all, I can't complain.
Absolutely. I mean, if you get a chance to go to the Dakar, you're not going to miss that for anything. So I was assigned to the Super Meteor 650 instead, and I wasn't complaining either because they did these rides in Jaisalmer. And you know what's really interesting? They had the global media rides there. So usually it's just us Indian media. Over the last 2 years, there have been barely any rides
Right.
to speak of because of COVID.
Yeah, of course.
But even after it's restarted, usually rides or drives in India are for the Indian media.
Correct.
But this was actually a global ride. So you had journalists from Japan, from Korea, from the UK, from America, from all over the world coming down to Jaisalmer to ride on our roads. You know, I was quite surprised. I was like, how are these guys going to survive with how traffic and how crazy things are on our roads? But Royal Enfield made it happen. They don't do things half-heartedly. It was a big event. You should have seen the sea of bikes. I'll try and play a photo of that visual on your screen right now. There was really a sea of Super Meteor 650s.
Some
over there.
70, 80 bikes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, maybe a little less than that. But yeah, I was on bike number 39, you know, and that was just the Indian group. Over that was the foreigners. So there were a fair few bikes, and yeah, it was a really nice ride. Jaisalmer, the roads are great. I think ideal cruising roads. You know, they're mostly straight. You've got a few lazy corners. The Bharatmala road that we love is not too far away from there.
Right.
Yeah, so great location to ride the bikes in.
So how was the bike?
How was the bike? Well, before I get into how was the bike, I need to confess that I got only 2.5 hours with the motorcycle. I didn't spend too much time with it. So the way Royal Enfield had planned it, we had one day of just shooting, yeah, and a second day of riding, where they took us from Jaisalmer to Jodhpur, some sightseeing along the way. That was just to experience the bikes. Now, the way my schedule was planned, I had to miss the second day. I had to be in Delhi for the jury round of the iMoti, where we were doing all of our voting and the Hunter came through. But because I had that commitment, which that could not shift and neither could the Super Meteor dates shift, so we only got a couple of hours on the first day of shooting time to experience the motorcycle. So I think it was a really brief ride, but a short time, but impressive. You know, it was really impressive.
I did get to see the bike at Ridermania. That's why we did the first walk around of the bike in India. Build quality has really come a long way. I mean, it properly differentiates itself even from the Interceptor to this, despite being from like essentially the same platform in terms of engine.
Correct.
The quality of things used and the attention to detail has really come a long way. Things like that bespoke badge on the tank for the Super Meteor and the Super Meteor motif going on there, really nice stuff.
And the motif is just one part of it. Now you look at the whole motorcycle, how it's finished, and the materials used. You know, you've got that brushed aluminum finish on
The switch cubes, right?
on the
Yeah,
switch
yeah.
cubes. You know, you've got a similar material on the fuel filler cap. It feels really premium. It feels really expensive. You look at the bike. You look at the way it's put together, the gaps here and
Right,
there between,
right.
say, the seat and the tank. You know, you look at the weld lines. You look at the way it's pieced together, the finish on stuff like the handlebar, the bar ends,
Right.
the triple clamp. You know, it all feels very. It feels like a step up from anything
Yeah.
Royal Enfield has done before.
sure.
Now, how this will age, we can't
Yeah,
say.
that is-
You know, but it's a promising start. It really justifies that premium over the
Over the-
Interceptor. You know,
yeah.
it comes in at rupees 60,000 more than the base Interceptor.
Correct.
You know, the base Super Meteor is 60 grand more than the base
Right,
Interceptor.
right.
So it's asking for a fair bit of money for something with the same engine. You know, there's a lot more going on. Obviously,
Correct,
we'll
yeah.
get into all of that. But on first impressions, you know, on the touch and feel aspect of it, it does feel more premium than the
Yeah,
Interceptor.
you definitely don't feel that pinch that you're paying a lot more for not much more, because you are getting quite a bit more
Correct.
when you're paying for that extra price.
Now, the first thing that stood out to me when I saw the Super Meteor was how proportional it was. You know, you think of Royal Enfield cruisers, you're thinking of the Thunderbird.
Yeah.
And that was a little bit of an awkward looking motorcycle, I
Right.
think.
A little too skinny from the front.
Skinny, then the tank was a little upright, and then the way the tank flowed into the flat seat, it looked a little
Yeah.
disproportionate to my eye. You know, like the headlamp was very high up, and then the way it flowed downwards. That was not a design that ever worked for me.
Yeah.
I much preferred the classics and the other stuff that Royal Enfield was doing back then. The Thunderbird was never a design that appealed to me. But now you look at the Super Meteor,
Meteor.
I think it's a much more proportional design. The way it
Definitely.
flows, you know, from front to back, it reminds me of much more traditional cruisers from, say,
Yeah,
Harley
yeah,
Davidson
yeah.
or Indian motorcycle.
Big fat cruiser.
The big fat cruiser, and it has that big boy,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, big bike charm to it. You know, it's got that big bike proportions.
Yeah, yeah,
you know.
definitely, definitely.
And it all comes down to a few things. You know,
Yeah.
they've got the white tank.
The white
You know,
tank.
it's a really chunky white tank, but it tapers near your legs so you can stand over it easily.
So does the seat. Like it
Yeah.
flows quite well.
Yeah.
So I guess even shorter riders shouldn't find it hard to.
Absolutely. You've also got, they've changed the engine casing, interestingly. So you look at the engine from the outside, it looks slightly different from the Interceptor's engine. That's just a visual differentiation.
Does it have the slight boxy thing that the Meteor 350 had going on? Like a slightly more bulbous top going down to the bottom?
Correct, it does. It is a little more meaty. I think that's their whole intention
Right.
with it, to get it looking a little more meaty. And then you look at the seat as well. It's a nice wide seat, especially the one that we were riding had the touring seat on it.
Correct.
The touring seat is a nice wide seat. The rear tire, it's a 150 section tire.
Correct.
You know,
This is
again,
the fattest on any Royal Enfield till
so
date, right?
far, yeah. So all of those things, I think they add up nicely. And then when you look at the styling elements on it, the way the tank is shaped, the way the frame is shaped,
Right.
you know, they've pulled in that very distinct styling element from other Royal Enfields. The way the frame bends under the seat and goes backwards
Right.
to where the rear suspension is
Right,
attached.
right.
That section is really nicely done. That's very distinct and actually makes it look like a Royal Enfield. It draws a link between the Super Meteor and the rest of the Royal Enfield
Right.
family. That little bit of a V-shaped structure in
Correct,
the frame.
correct.
You know, so visually, I think they've done a damn good job, and I think visuals are going to be a critical aspect of what this motorcycle is. Right, the
Definitely.
draw
Yeah,
of a
yeah.
cruiser is so much of how it looks.
Correct.
You know, the visual drama that it and the emotion that it evokes in people. So good job on them for nailing that design, I would say.
For sure. I agree. And they have some interesting color schemes going on as well.
Correct. I can't remember the names of their color schemes. There's some cool names. There's Celestial, there's Astral, and Interstellar, if I'm not wrong. Yeah.
If I'm not wrong, Celestial is the touring variant with the red and the blue colorway. You rode the red one, right?
Yeah, it's like you don't hold us to this. We may mix this up because
We'll have supers mentioning which is what.
yeah, but there are three different color schemes and at three different prices. The one we rode was the top end touring variant with the dual tone scheme, you know,
Right.
and looks damn good. Looks very nice. The paint finish, the quality of paint, the way it looks, and the sheen that it has, it's rich. It doesn't feel like a
An afterthought.
a shoddy
Yeah.
paint job. It feels like a nice, deep, rich paint job.
Right. And what differentiates the base to the touring variant?
Three things primarily. You've got the windscreen.
Right.
You've got the touring seat. A wider seat, which is so the regular Super Meteor, it has a split seat. So you've got a single seat with a split rear section
right.
seat. The touring seat is a flowing unit, a lot more wider and supposedly a lot more comfortable. I didn't get a chance to experience the regular seat, but what the guys who rode it told me, they said this is much nicer.
Much nicer.
And you get the backrest. So typical Thunderbird style, that
Right,
backrest
right.
at the back of the pillion seat.
Right.
That is what you get on the touring. So those are the main differences between the regular and the touring.
Right. And the platform style, the chunky pegs, those are standard on all variants?
Yeah, that's common across all variants. So those really fat cruiser-like foot pegs, that's common.
And if I'm not wrong, all of these things can be mixed and matched after the fact also, right? So say I were to buy the base variant,
Yeah.
I can get the windscreen, the touring seat and all of that later,
Absolutely. So as usual, Royal Enfield wants you to customize their bikes. They've got a whole lot of accessories that you
Right.
can buy. So yeah, if you want, just get the Royal regular, and you want only the windscreen, you can get that. If you want only the touring seat, you can get that. So you've got a whole bunch of things that you can do. You can even get a touring handlebar. So a more laid back handlebar. And speaking of which, I should talk about the ergonomics of the motorcycle. It's a very comfortable bike to sit on, when you're riding it. It's a really nice, comfortable riding position. When you look at cruisers, you want something that you're sitting comfortably on. You want to be relaxed. There are a lot of cruisers that force you to lean forward
Right.
on them.
Yeah.
Like
that can become cumbersome after a
so
while.
you've got your feet forward and your back forward. That gets tiring. This is not that. So even in its regular stock trim, even with the regular handlebars, I'm 5'10". I was sitting upright, like really upright. My feet were put forward, but I'm sitting upright on the motorcycle.
And by your hands are reach. for
Hardly.
the-
I think even somebody shorter than me would be able to sit upright on the bike. And you've got a lot of space, so even somebody taller than me would be comfortable on the bike. I think they've got a good balance with the ergonomics there.
Right.
The
And they will have to, considering that this is not just a bike for the Indian market, and especially considering it's going to places like the US and Europe and all that,
Yeah.
people there are generally larger. So they will have to get that ergonomic spot on for it to sell
Absolutely.
there as well.
Absolutely. So this is a global motorcycle for Royal Enfield. I recently read a report that the Royal Enfield Meteor, the regular Meteor 350, is the best-selling bike in the UK from 250cc to 400 or 500cc.
That's impressive.
So they're doing their numbers abroad, and I think this will just open it up to a whole new audience.
Yeah. That is interesting. So what would you talk, like how easy do you think the bike will be to live with on a daily basis?
That's a good question, because this is Royal Enfield's heaviest motorcycle yet.
And that's saying something.
Yeah, so it's 241 kgs. That's a lot of weight.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, you do feel the weight. Not when you're riding, but when you're at low speeds, when you're trying to pick it off the stand, put it back onto the stand, if you're trying to put it on a center stand,
Right.
if you're pushing it or pulling it out of a parking spot, maybe if you're trying to take a U-turn, so low speed maneuvering, you do feel that weight.
Right.
It is a cruiser, so the weight is low down. So it's a little easier to manage, but it's very present. It's not like you can get away from the fact that this is a 240
240
kg.
is not something you can shy away from. Yeah.
Especially at lower speeds. So if you're going to be, this is something you should be mindful of. If you're going to get the Super Meteor, be prepared for that weight. Be prepared to muscle it around at slow speeds a little bit. So when you're saying how easy is it to live with, I think that's something that you have to be mindful of, but it's not something that's going to be a problem. There are much heavier motorcycles.
And you will eventually get used to it.
Correct. Yeah. Once you ride it around, once you get used to it, you'll realize tips and tricks to get it rolling better, and then it's easy. That aside, I think it shouldn't be too hard a motorcycle to live with in the city. We haven't ridden it in the city. We've ridden it on beautiful open roads in Jaisalmer briefly. But once it comes here, we're supposed to get our long-termer very soon.
We will give you daily updates.
Yeah.
Not daily updates, but updates, little tips and tricks, some things you can do to have a much more enjoyable time on it if you are considering to get it as your daily rider.
Absolutely, yes. So, I don't see why it should be a problem. People ride Interceptors everywhere. You're a more relaxed riding position. That's about it. So, yeah, maybe it will feel a little more cumbersome in traffic because of the raked out front, and you've got the windscreen. So, that might make it a bit hot in the summers.
Right.
Yeah, but that aside, I don't see why it should be a problem.
Interestingly, we got a comment on your review,
Hmm.
which asked how would it be in daily use in the sense of ground clearance. Now, this is a longer wheelbase, and you are sitting lower.
Yeah.
740 is your seat height, I think.
Correct. 740
So-
mm seat height. Ground clearance is around 135 I think.
That is not a lot.
Yeah. The wheelbase is longer. So the wheelbase on this motorcycle is 1500 which is 100 more than the Interceptor.
That is
you know.
quite a bit. Yeah.
So you've got a raked out front, you've got a longer trail, the whole geometry of the frame is different. So it is a longer bike. We rode it over some speed breakers,
Yeah.
reasonably sized speed breakers. They're not some of those, like you get some absolute monsters out of the blue somewhere in India.
Yeah, yeah.
It wasn't one of those. It was just regular sized speed breakers. They weren't those small humps either. They were proper speed breakers. No problem. You know, with me on the saddle, one person on the saddle, no trouble at all. But again, with more weight on it, I'm going to have to wait and see when we ride it a little more. I don't think it should be too much of a problem. At the end of the day, Royal Enfield knows
Yeah.
they're going to be selling these bikes in India.
Yeah,
you know?
definitely.
So they're not going to design a bike which is impossible to use in Indian conditions.
True.
So I think we're good. You know, for me, as a single person on the bike, even if I put a few kilos of luggage on it, I don't see it being a problem. Two up, okay, we'll have to test that to be sure, but should be okay.
Speaking of, is the rear preload adjustable?
It is adjustable.
So that should
Yeah.
alleviate some of those issues as well.
The rear is preload adjustable, and I think talking about suspension, we must mention that this is the first Royal Enfield with USDs.
Yes, and
This is-
Showa USDs no less.
Yeah, so you've got upside down forks on the Super Meteor 650. The suspension's interesting. You know, it's a good balance, I think. Yeah. So it is firm. You know, you've got short travel suspension. You've got, I think, 120 in the front, 101 in the rear. 101 of travel is not a lot.
Not a lot, no.
Yeah. So to keep the suspension working in that 101 you need
Stiffer rates.
Yeah.
And that's usual for cruisers because mostly cruisers are meant to live out 80% of their life on highways which have good pavement. So you don't need a lot of travel. What you do need is good ride quality, which usually comes from a slightly firmer setup, especially when you have decent roads.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what they've done here.
Absolutely. So you've got a firm setup. Especially at the rear, it's firmer than the front. The front actually deals with bumps very nicely.
Yeah.
I really enjoy. You took it over little small bumps. It really soaks it up really nicely. The rear, you feel a little more than the front.
Right.
Okay, but at no point did I find myself uncomfortable. It was a regular Indian bumpy road. You know, it was not potholed, so I wouldn't say I went through deep ruts and really tested the limits of the suspension. But a regular bumpy road deals with absolutely fine. I was comfortable on the saddle. It was firm, but I was comfortable. You know, and for most use, I think it will suffice.
And I also think the rear is tuned a little stiffer because they are expecting you to put luggage eventually. So when you do add luggage, you will need a little more to work the suspension.
Sure.
Maybe that is why
Luggage
it is.
pillion, you can expect a fair bit of weight on the rear of this motorcycle, you know. So yeah, but I think a highlight of the bike was definitely the engine. You know,
Yeah, we didn't get about that.
when the Interceptor first launched, then itself you knew, okay, this is going to make it to a cruiser one day.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that engine works really well in the Interceptor, the Super Meteors format.
Yeah.
They've made some changes to it. So if you see the exhaust pipes, they no longer stick out like on the Interceptor.
Yeah.
You know, they go underneath the bike. So they've changed the way the exhaust flows. They've changed the intake. They've changed the mapping because they've changed the intakes and exhaust.
Correct, yeah.
And they've also changed the gearing. So the whole idea here is to get torque accessible as early as possible in the rev range.
Right.
Their claim is you can get some 80 or 85% of torque from 2500 80% torque from 2500 RPM.
Nice.
You know, which is a fair bit.
Yeah.
And that torquey nature is what really shines through the Super Meteor's engine. You know, you get off the clutch and you're instantly rolling. You don't really need to roll onto the throttle to get moving. There's so much torque.
I think that also makes it a lot more effortless in general. You're not working the gearbox as much.
Correct. It's completely effortless. So the tractability is another highlight. You know, you can sit at a high gear at a low speed. I think I tested it. It was comfortable at 50 kilometers an hour in sixth gear. You know, and at 50, you just roll onto the throttle and it picks up and it goes. You know, so when you're on the highway, say you're cruising at 110, 120 kilometers an hour, you get some traffic, you don't have to shift down. You can just roll off, maybe gently tap the brakes, get your speed down to 70, 80 kilometers an hour. And once you're past, once you're in the clear, roll back on the throttle. There's no shifting up and down. It's not it's an engine with a fair bit of spread in terms of the way it makes its power and tractability at the low end. So should the revs drop, should you find yourself low down in the rev range, you're not stuttering and stalling. It's not threatening to stall. It just lugs along, you know. And I think what I really enjoyed about the engine also was its performance. It's the 650 engine, so you know how it performs.
Right.
But in the Super Meteor, you can sit at 120 kilometers an hour all day. You know, no Royal Enfield cruiser has that ability until now.
For sure.
The 350, it's a good engine, but it's strained at that speed.
100.
Yeah.
100 is like the max you can do comfortably.
Correct. So anything beyond 100, you're straining it. You're really wringing it out. The Thunderbirds, it was the older engine. You know, the 500 even, it was strained at that sort of speed. This is just effortless. It's creamy, smooth. You can sit at 120. You want more speed, you roll on and it'll give you that speed. You know, that effortlessness of the engine really shines through. Getting up to 120, super easy. Sitting at 120, super easy. You can sit there all day long. It's absolutely beautiful. And the refinement.
Right, yeah.
That's another thing. When you're talking about cruisers, you need good refinement because you're going to be sitting on the saddle for hours on end.
Yeah.
You can't have it buzzing and vibing, and if that's the case, you're going to get fatigued
Very fast.
in the saddle, you know. So you need a bike that's well isolated from the vibrations that the engine is making, and the Super Meteor does that really well. So on the seat, you barely feel anything. On the pegs, you barely feel anything. There's a little bit in the bars, slight buzz in the bars and pegs, but it's never intrusive. If anything, it just adds to the motorcycle's character. You know, it's not like the old Royal Enfields that would rattle your teeth out. This is just a mild buzz to remind you that yes, I do have an internal combustion engine there.
Which is important these days. You never know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the engine also, they've really done a good job.
And talking about fatigue, even the tractability and the roll-on ability,
Yeah.
it may seem inconsequential in conversation, but when you're actually out there on the highway for long hours, not having to work your gearbox or your clutch hand constantly and just being able to do that, cruising essentially, it really allows you to go that much further without fatigue, and you can just do that day in and day out, day in and day out. But the second you need to start constantly working your controls and doing things is when, again, fatigue sets in. You're focusing on so many other things. Otherwise, you can just enjoy the scenery, enjoy the ride.
Absolutely.
And I think this enables that.
Yeah, and it's different types of motorcycling, right?
Right.
Like if I'm on my KTM and I'm doing Pune, Bangalore, I'm going to be on it the whole time. You know, I can't sit in
Correct.
sixth gear and roll on and off. It's not going to happen. You won't even enjoy it.
And you don't want to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not a bike that wants you to do that. You want to ride. But a Super Meteor is a bike that wants you to relax in the saddle.
Exactly.
The way you're sitting, you know, you're sitting and you're chilling over there. You're literally feet kicked out in front of you, arms relaxed on the handlebar. You're chilling. And you can just roll on and off. You don't have to think too much. It's very natural the way it comes to you. So yeah, it's a well executed motorcycle.
Damn. Now I'm really looking forward to riding one.
Yeah, but some things that I do have to point out and criticize about it. The windscreen. Okay. I found that, at least for my height, 5'10", whatever the build I am, at highway speeds, the windscreens, the way it deflects its wind, the wind comes and hits me at the top of my helmet. Okay, so it's really disorienting because you have no wind anywhere, and then you've got this fluttering at the top of your helmet. It's quite uncomfortable. Not something that I enjoyed. I didn't ride the motorcycle without the windscreen. That's something I'm actually looking forward to doing to see how different that is. But the windscreen, sure, it may work, but if it's hitting you in the head, it's
pointless.
Yeah.
It's not pointless, but then the fatigue will kick in just a
and then
little sooner
I found
because
that
you
I have to tuck
you
in
have to tuck.
to avoid that wind blast, and I was not so comfortable doing that. You know, the second thing that I noticed was the shift lever. You've got a heel toe shifter.
Right.
Okay, my boot size is 42. Okay, I had to take my foot off the the peg to shift.
So it's a longer shift lever.
It's a long shift lever. So a longer boot will be more comfortable on it. Me, I had to keep moving my foot to shift.
Yeah, and when you're in that raked out position, it's not really easy to get under the shifter to shift regularly. So
Correct.
Yeah,
So,
that can become.
I mean, I wasn't using the heel side of things too much, but even for the toes, I had to get my foot off to use the toe side of the shifter to shift. So,
That's quite.
I mean, I guess it's a small thing, nothing too major, but you know, the bike is so good that you have to find you're
Yeah.
only finding small issues with it.
Yeah, I guess when everything is working so well, these small things do start to
Correct.
they're more apparent.
Yeah, I mean, if it couldn't sit at 120 kilometers an hour, that's what we would be talking about here. But
Exactly.
we're not, and
Yeah.
we're criticizing the smaller things. But they're worth talking about as well, and worth you knowing
Right, definitely.
as well.
Anything else? Maybe like how's the braking performance, ABS, all those things.
Brakes are good. They're strong brakes. You've got a large disc at the rear, so you've got I think a 300 disc at the rear with 2 pistons, and that's
For perspective, your average 150 to 200, 300 cc bike in India, anywhere actually, your front disc is roughly 300 with a 2-piston caliper. So yeah, that is
yeah. So you've got a 320 up front, a 300 in the rear, both 2-piston calipers, and they work well. You know, when you use them, if you just use the front brakes, you're not going to stop. You have to use both brakes together because the format of the motorcycle is such that you have so much weight on the rear.
right, and you're dealing with a much longer bike also.
Exactly. So you have weight on the rear. There is a fair bit of stopping power to be had from the rear wheel,
Correct.
the rear tire. So use both brakes and you're good. You know, it's really confidence inspiring. Strong brakes, good feel. No complaints there.
Good tires?
Tires, yeah. I mean, we was riding them on straight roads. So there's not much we could say about them. But
Right, so now we've covered quite a bit about the Super Meteor, but it is the most expensive, the most heaviest, quite a few firsts for it. Is it value for money though?
look, it depends what you look at as value. Okay. 60,000 rupees more than the Interceptor. You're getting a bike that feels more polished than it, that is looks and feels more expensive than it, that has a fair bit more kit than it. You've got the tripper, you've got LED lights, you've got USDs, you've got all of that stuff going on. So objectively, when you look at it, when it comes to value, yeah, you can justify it in some ways. But I think you have to look at the bigger picture. What is the Super Meteor? What is it delivering? You know, I think it's delivering the experience, and I said this in my first ride review as well. It's delivering the experience that big Harleys, that big Indian motorcycles, that some of the Triumphs also do really well. You know, that nice big cruiser bike
Right.
experience. At what price? You know, it's still a heavy bike. It's got presence. It sounds really nice. It goes really well. It nails all of that stuff, and it gives you that big bike experience, that big cruiser experience at 3.5 lakh rupees ex showroom. There's no other bike delivering that sort of value in that space. You don't have cruisers really in that space. You've got the Vulcan from Kawasaki, the Vulcan
But again,
SU.
it's quite a
Exactly.
price chunk higher.
And you've got that Benelli, that 502C, you know. But neither of them feel as nice and big bikey to ride
Yeah.
as the Super Meteor does. I think
that
that
it has a special appeal.
absolutely, it makes you feel special. Every time you get onto it, you're like, wow, you know, okay, I have to lift it up, really heave it and lift it up. But when you're on the move, it feels so nice. It feels like a really nice big bike. It sounds well. It really sounds nice, and it goes so well. You know, I don't think those are attributes that you can assign value for money to. You know, and I think for the experience that it delivers, it's a great motorcycle for the price.
Right.
So yeah, overall, super impressed. Now, more stuff coming from Royal Enfield. We expect a few new bikes. What do you know that I don't know?
Okay, I don't know much that you might not probably already know, but what I am definitely looking forward to the most is the new 450 Himalayan.
Yeah.
Yeah. In some interesting changes there, so we can expect Royal Enfield's first liquid cooled engine.
Yeah.
Single cylinder. Also, if predictions are correct, it's not going to be a long stroke. It's going to be a more traditional short stroke liquid cooled engine. Performance in the thereabouts of 40, 45 bhp, something along those lines. And again, more premium kit. And what I'm more interested for, now this is still some time away, but what I'm more interested is what that Himalayan 450 is going to spawn. Essentially, we can expect a higher spec rally raid version of that, and with that, we can possibly expect Royal Enfield to show up at the Dakar.
Yeah, I've heard rumors of this too. Apparently, C.S. Santosh has joined Royal Enfield. You were at the Dakar. Did you see them there?
I think I missed him by a day.
Okay. But
But
he
yeah,
was
he
there.
was there.
With somebody from Royal Enfield.
Yeah, that's what
You
I've
know,
been
so,
told.
So Santosh is with Royal Enfield. They do have plans of the Dakar, and that sort of aligns with the Himalayan 450, you know.
Yeah.
So we could be seeing a 450 Himalayan at the Dakar in the next couple of years.
And that is going to be really exciting because it would essentially mark the third Indian marquee to enter the Dakar.
Correct.
And when you're talking about a company like Royal Enfield, now Hero is at the Dakar. The X-Pulse 200 was a result of that bike, but we still don't have, at least right now, a bike that is similar to that spec or somewhere in that ballpark.
Correct.
But with this Himalayan 450, we're going to be getting the regular Himalayan 450 first, and essentially based on that is going to be the Dakar bike. So that's just going to be that much more special.
Absolutely. And you're right, third Indian manufacturer at the Dakar, that'll be really exciting. Again, no idea what sort of timelines we're looking at, no idea when this is going to happen. It is still a couple of years away. The Dakar is...
Couple of years at the minimum.
Yeah, the Dakar is a harsh race. It's not a race that you can just pump money into and win. I think Audi has demonstrated that. You know, they've pumped a bunch of money in, but the Dakar, it's hard. It takes years of research, development, trying, attempting before you can even get close to anywhere being successful at the Dakar. The Toyotas, they killed it this year.
Yeah.
On the bikes front, KTM, neck and shoulders above the rest. So even if Royal Enfield does go to the Dakar, it's going to be tough for them. But the big but is Royal Enfield hasn't been doing anything in half measures of late.
Exactly,
You know, nothing they've done recently is in a half measure. They really commit to everything that they're putting their mind to, and let's just hope that this is as exciting. Other motorcycles, is there anything else coming on the 650 platform?
The 650 platform, not that I'm really aware of, but again, the same 450 platform is going to spawn motorcycles like the Scram 450, like we had the Scram 411,
Yeah.
and bikes like that. And if I'm not wrong, we can also expect a few more bikes to come out of the 350cc J series platform, like a Bobber maybe,
Yeah.
and even more importantly, the original Bullet
Yeah.
might make a comeback in the 350cc J series platform.
Correct. So they'll retain the original styling of the Bullet, but all the fresh new underpinnings.
Something along those lines, and it will also be a lot more affordable than the Classic or the Meteor. I think if assumptions are correct, it should be priced around the base Hunter 350's price.
Right. So lots more exciting motorcycles coming from Royal Enfield, lots more exciting action coming from Royal Enfield. The Himalayan 450, I think we're both looking forward
Definitely.
to seeing that motorcycle.
There's definitely going to be a fight for the long term of that one.
But that's still a while away. So that's it for this episode of the Evo India, the Thrill of Driving podcast, or like we said, the Thrill of Riding podcast. I'm Aatish Mishra signing off. Karan Ramgopal in the studio with me. If you've got questions about the Super Meteor, please leave them in the comments below. Both of us will be in the comment section, making sure we reply to everything that we can. And we'll see you next week.